Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you joining us on the West Coast today. Segal Consulting would like to welcome you to today's webinar, The Employer Shared Responsibility Rules and Reporting Requirements, What You Need to Know. Now I would like to introduce you to our speakers. We have Kathy Bakich, Senior Vice President and our National Health Compliance Leader, Rick Johnson, Senior Vice President and our Public Sector National Health Practice Leader, and at the end of our call, our team of legal experts, Joanne Husted and Shannon Kane, will join us to help answer your questions. With that, I will turn things over to Rick to begin today's presentation.
And thank you, Sean, and good day to all. One of the things that we're finding is that public sector employers and plans are now faced with a number of different challenges regarding the Affordable Care Act. And those challenges, we're going to talk about four of those today. First is measuring your full-time employees, particularly for the shared responsibility penalty calculations and purposes. Second, looking at the new reporting requirements under ACA with the rules that were just released in March. The third area is talking about the excise tax that will phase in and come in 2018. And then finally, through all of this, how do you maintain a healthy workforce and manage trend with your existing plans with all of this going on around you? My colleague, Kathy Bakich, will take us through the specifics. Kathy, let me hand that over to you.
Hi, Rick, and welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk about the employer penalty, but first of all, I wanted to remind you about how the individual mandate works, because as you'll see later on, particularly when we get to the reporting section, the employer penalty and the individual mandate and the federal subsidies all work together to form a whole in terms of how the ACA is being implemented. So individuals have to be covered under minimum essential health care coverage, which includes employer-sponsored coverage or Medicare, or they have to pay a penalty. The penalties are listed here: $95 per adult the first year or 1% of income, $325 the second year or 2%, and $695 or 2.5% the third year. There are exceptions from this penalty. If you have a coverage lapse of 3 months or less once per year, or if the cost of coverage exceeds 8% of household income, although that's going to be indexed in future years, if you have a low income, it's below the income tax filing threshold, or if you're a Native American. The individual penalty is a portion of your federal tax, and the reason that this is important is because it ties in with the tax reporting schemes that you'll see are part of the reporting regimen that we'll talk about later on, because the individual penalty is paid when people pay their taxes for the previous year. So moving to the next slide on the employer penalty. The penalty applies to large employers, and that's employers with 50 or more full-time employees or full-time employee equivalents. Now, a full-time employee is someone who works 30 or more hours of service per week or 130 hours per month, and we'll talk about how you get to that calculation later on in the presentation. The penalty is triggered when a full-time employee receives a federal subsidy in a state or federal exchange, and an employer cannot retaliate against employees for exercising their rights under the ACA, including being entitled to subsidies. So let's dig a little down further on the next slide, how the penalty works. There's two parts to the penalty.